throughout, an individual one. And then I have to drop this extremely cumbersome abstract text from the absolute idea in the science of logic, so I can just juxtapose the text and then I can do my analysis. In this turning point of method, this is Hegel now, 1812, and then of course the second completion of the science of logic, not to be confused with the encyclopedia's logic, 1816. In this turning point of the method, the course of cognition returns at the same time back into itself. The negativity is a self-sublating contradiction, the restoration of the first immediacy of simple universality. For the other of the other, the negative of the negative is immediately the positive, the identical, the universal. In the whole course, if one all cares to count, the second immediate is third to the first immediate and the mediated, but it's also third to the first or formal negative, and to therefore the absolute negativity or the second negative inside the first. Now, insofar as the first negative is already the second term, the term counted as third can also be counted as a fourth. So instead of a triplicity, the abstract form, being maybe for Heidegger, Ian's ontos and theos, ontos as beings and what makes an entity what it is, Platonic distinction in the forms, and the theos is the totality of the wholeness, or the universality of everything that grounds all beings. So beauty, you give that example of every object. We don't ask about the object and its empirical features, but what makes it beautiful. But of course, in order to have an understanding of that, we have to have beauty in general. That's the highest form. We can't have a vision of that because it transcends all ontic entities. We know this is the root of all Western thought. So where's Hegel going with the culmination? Ontological difference, we'll come back to it, but it's not a triplicity, it's quadruplicity. In this way, the negative or the difference is counted as a duality. Duality, no, we have to think about the unicity, the oneness, the monos, the remaining of oneself alone, the monotheistic. The third or the fourth is in general, the unity of the first and the second moment, the immediate and immediate. That it's this unity, or that entire form of the method is a triplicity, is indeed nothing but merely superficial. Even going back to the triplicity, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. This, its opposite, the negation of the negation, the raising and lifting of the, or canceling the limit within that allows the identity to get to what it fully is, the becoming to its synthesis, the teleological endpoint. Unity, come on, triplicity. We know that. That's it. That's what we teach in high school. We want to teach the dialectic. Is indeed nothing but the merely superficial external side of cognition. But to have also demonstrated the superficiality and have to have done it in the context of a specific application. For the abstract form of number has been around for a long time, as is well known, but without conceptual comprehension, and therefore without any result, is again to be regarded as the infinite merit of Kantian philosophy. Not only did he open up the antinomies, but he explored the limits of reason to answer all the fundamental questions of metaphysics. Can't deny Kant's Copernican revolution, as it's referred to. Okay, so let's really get into it now. And as another side note, I'm sorry, and I can't reduce ontotheology, even if Heidegger, if he sometimes elliptically, the early from phenomenology of religious life up to everything else we know of in the late Heidegger, and certainly in Identity and Difference, and the essay Ontotheological Constitution of Metaphysics, where he comes back to Hegel. Yes, we have to take on Ian and ontotheos in that sense to even have the possibility to get into the complexity of holism and historicity. But it can't preclude an all-out altercation with the biblical heritage. And that means that's going to limit the possibility for those of us that can engage that heritage. If you don't know the biblical Hebrew and the New Testament Greek and the Latinization and everything else that Heidegger had to grapple with, and then the history of the church fathers and the precarious, as we'll get to, the relationship between philosophy and theology, their mortal enemies, phenomenology and theology, 1927. Philosophy doesn't even want to begin to do battle with theology. And of course, none of us are theologians, nor would we ever reduce the enterprise of philosophy. And that's someone like Heidegger. Forget about the response to Nietzsche, but Heidegger goes on to something like theology. It is not theology. Heidegger is not doing theology. So what are we doing here? What is this being in time science? Now we can attempt the double reading of being in time and the science of logic to get back to later Heidegger, 1950, the thing, the Gewährt, the Fourfold, the mirror play. What is great about bringing the early Heidegger being in time into dialogue with the most mature Hegel is that both are trying to grasp the whole, or in Hegel's language, the absolute. Of course, as Heidegger says several times in Being in Time, they're absolutely not doing the same thing or answering the same question, both in terms of the analysis and orientation. In fact, it's the opposite what Heidegger is doing. This is why our project, not theirs, risks a grave misunderstanding. It's as if they're in the same race, and we're trying to ask who's faster. Same question, trying to come up with the same answer. No. If Heidegger's going after the unity of time against spatialized linear flow of now points on clocks and calendars, and within timeless in general, inner Zeitgeist, then Hegel is going for the metaphysics of movement as a complex event, not the movement of a thing in space, the movement of space itself, or the being of movement in and of itself, irrespective of the thing in motion, all the paradoxes that go back to Aristotle. Quite frankly, Plato. Aristotle in response to Plato. In our horizon, not being in time and time, but the ultimate question is being reconstructed as one of a four-dimensional time interrelations movement event happening as the ground that cannot appear as full presence. What does this require? Well, you have Heidegger's ontological difference, but also the three ecstasies of time, 65. Then you have this traditional, what looks like the three-moment dialectic of the first immediate identity, first formal negative, its opposite or antithesis, the negation hidden in any kind of identity. But to really try to not bring that identity into becoming or nothingness into full presence, it has a negative. So there's a second negative in it, in that second point, negative of the negative, which doesn't resolve itself immediately to the synthesis, and other of another. Third, as what will eventually emerge in the synthesis, a third, second immediate, another beginning, which looks circular. We come back to what we are. The sublation of mediation, sublation of difference, the realization of the concept through its otherness. For Hegel, the whole science of logic culminates as well. We know what this is for him, results in truth. Heidegger on Plato to Hegel, Heidegger on Plato to Hegel to Ian's Nietzsche, the two Nietzsches, this is the problem with the Western logos. It's trying to extract, first of all, there is a truth. There's a truth of being, there's a being of truth. Truth is something, truth is related to the is, truth is the will to truth. If you don't have that, you have a will to will. Heidegger is the first, let's acknowledge that. That's his genius. He breaks it wide open, and poor Hegel, he's so naive. He thinks, oh, well, there's a truth. Okay, wait a minute. Our four-dimensional time interrelations movement event conceals a complex set of interrelations that go beyond origin and end, non-origin, non-end. And remember, what is other to all those? Other to origin, other to end, other to non-origin, and quite frankly, other to non-end. The event of movement is not circular, linear, but involves all four terms, their others, and surpassing them. I'm obsessed with this question of event and movement. In the phenomenology of spirit, the science of logic, we can bracket the entire breaking point of the eternal return in its history, great figures in the 20th century leading up to Ian. I want to bracket this question of movement as not reducible to the history of Platonic metaphysics up to whatever we think is a three-moment event in Hegel. I'm thinking of quadruplicity, not circular, not linear, not rectilinear. So put it out there, and quite frankly, not spatial.
Right. The text is gone. You can't see it anymore.
Did it just disappear?
Yeah.
I wonder why.
I don't know why either.
But hopefully we would have fallen till then. Did we get the quote?
There we go.
It's back.
I hope I don't know where we lost itself, but I'm just going to go back to, I was talking about the antinomies, origin, end, non-origin, non-end, what is other to all of them. Anyway, our hypothesis, I'm going to start reading here if you can see this, is that for either Hegel or Heidegger, we can't rely on the spatialized geometry of the circle or the line or the rectilinear motion of a line. Furthermore, even though both Heidegger and Being in Time, Hegel and the Science of Logic settle on three, we embark on four. Three for the ecstasies, three of the moments, and before there's any quadruplicity in Hegel. Quite frankly, the threefold structure of the science of logic, being in essence a concept, being in essence is supposed to be the objective concept. The subject of logic or subjective concept is the absolute idea. That's what culminates the whole work. It's an individual structure. It's about freedom. I want to get into the intricacies of the science of logic, but it's also an attempt to surpass the history of metaphysics. Okay, and for me, to go back to that early, to Being in Time, and then to go back to another reading of Hegel, where you take seriously this four, for me, that's the pretext, the presupposition to have a more authentic, it sounds like an oxymoron, speculative metaphysical. It sounds like it's anti-Heidegger. It's impossible to think this way later, Heidegger. A speculative metaphysical, at least impulse, to go back to the thing in the fourfold. Earth, sky, mortals, divinities, poetic, the response to technological, Ian's aporia of saving, power out of the danger. Yes, I want to get into all that, but for me, as I've always told them, I'm coming at this from a very naive, childlike attempt to produce a speculative metaphysics of four-dimensional time. Well, you know what? I'm not off, because your pal Heidegger in 1962 on Time and Being, true time is four-dimensional, the cryptic point in that excellent text, which ends everything. Forget about his later encounter with Heraclitus. I don't know what happened in the 70s. You can tell me, Alfred, if there's anything more, but for me, the attempt to think time at that level of promise is on Time and Being. 4 is prior to 3, but one can ask, what is the meaning of the prior? If it's not temporalized as a before moment on a line, or the Kantian a priori as a transcendental condition of possibility to generate representations, I didn't write this right, through concepts of the manifold that arises from experience. As we know from Kant, the whole event of this enterprise, the transcendental critique, it's irreducible to experience. Therefore, it cannot be reduced to the subject-object split. That's Kant's great breakthrough. But we're not talking about a fourth moment or a number. We're talking about fourness in general, because Heidegger says this too. It's a unicity. It's a single foldedness of the fourness, fourfold oneness. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, it's not a fourth moment. But my autotheos obviously has to take on the tradition of Western religion. Keep in mind the backdrop is the antithetical will. Alfred, how am I doing on time? 10 more minutes? You're not sure? I don't know when I'm supposed to stop at 1.
No, you can continue, I think, a little bit.
All right, I think the paper really, I'll have to pause here. It looks like a lot. Yeah, not even where it's supposed to be, because I keep thinking. I'm gonna try to do something within 10 minutes, but it's not possible. Okay, let's see where we're at.
Well, you have 10 minutes if you want.
Yeah, okay. So I think I know where I can pause, and then I can summarize the rest. Also, keep in mind, for me, the backdrop is this antithetical will, the anti-Christological motor impulse that would like to reckon and destroy the complex numerology of not only the Trinity, but the hypostatic substance of the two natures in the second person of Jesus, divine and human, both true and complete, neither one mixing with nor separated from the other, neither one dividing or changing the other. 2 equals 1, the aporia of his own Christological substance. And that's just one person in the 3 persons that equal one God. At the end of the day, everything comes back to 3 for Christianity, and what is other to it, perhaps a whole other religion would be a 4, not Nietzsche's Zarathustra. In the Gentile West, I'm being very careful here to not say the Judeo-Christian West, or the substrate of Judaism as the hidden other, perhaps the future of Christianity itself, because it cannot be destroyed, first of all. It couldn't be repressed, it couldn't be sublimated. It's futuristic. So what does that do with the eschatological sort of ending of Christianity, passage to what is totally ulterior? I'm going to bracket that, but I'm staying here with Christianity. We all know it's 3, unless you're some heretic who want to come up with some Markian, fourfold God out of Christianity. In the Gentile West, there's nothing more ambitious in human thought than the metaphysical abstraction of Hegel, what I argue is the quadruplicity. You all know the exceptional analytic of Heidegger in his most elaborate treatise, Being in Time, if we read it with the utmost granularity it deserves, in the history of systematic and philosophical theological articulations of the triune Christian God. Simply put, in the West, there's no four-dimensional time, there's four-dimensional God. If one were to rise, it can do so only in response to Hegel, Heidegger, and Christian philosophical theology, which both thinkers in their own ways try to either destroy, engulf, or surpass. Complex intertwinement of both thinkers' lives, as persons, as texts, their own philosophies, and the repressive ontotheological question that runs throughout. I have 2 great quotes from Heidegger himself, personal quotes that I want to share at the end. And both would not have done what they did without the beginnings laid down by Plato and Aristotle and crossed over with Kant. Okay, I won't repeat this section here. I will just jump to my concluding paragraphs, and then I can just in the Q&A respond. It's really a very fine reading of ecstatic temporality. I'm going through paragraph to paragraph. I'm going through the letting itself come towards itself. The Erstreckung, I go back to section 72, chapter 5, that opens up being towards birth, being towards death, the Bewegung, the problem of motion, not historicality, not historicity, however you want to define it, but really getting to this 2 ends. We heard about being towards death, Ian's work, and everything else we've learned. Don't mess around with perishing and demising, and don't be too quick to establish what we think he means by death. Don't use his own language, possibility and impossibility, or death is the way of life, or from the moment we're born, we're already dying, et cetera, et cetera. Being towards death, leave it alone and leave the death event alone. It's not in time. You're never going to experience it. You can't come back from it. You won't even know what's happening. It has nothing to do with that type of linear spatialization. You can't take the place of the other. And we won't come back from it to tell people how we survive it. I know this is a crass reduction here, but yes, that's being towards death, but what about being towards birth? So I move through there. I go back to static temporality. I get to the famous paragraph on the estikon itself, and staticon itself, the primordial outside of itself, or in itself. And then my story really ends with the gleiche Ursprünglichkeit, the very ambiguous end here in 1665 that you couldn't develop. The equiprimordiality. I don't want to hear about primordial, finite, unified, authentic, temporalizing of temporality, and people say, okay, that's it. Coming towards the having been making present. He was trying to get at their equiprimordiality, and he couldn't do it. The differences of how they all temporalize their relations with each other differently. The having been is going to do it with the coming towards and the making present. Making present is going to do that with the coming towards and having been. In chapter 4 on the temporality of everydayness also picks up all the various registers. Extematic temporality, 1928. Engagement with Kant before the 29th book in 1927. The apperception and the unity. As Ian said, it's always been phenomenological, but it's not Husserlian. It's not internal time consciousness, protensions, retentions. There's no presumptive subject beneath all this. Temporality for what it is. Temporalizing never is. It's not even a knot. And the knot's not just a knot. It has being, partakes of being, has its own uncanny structure. But the temporality of the nothingness, let's get into that. Sorry, temporalizing of the temporality. So that's where I was heading. And then me is just my own creation beyond these 6 iterations and trying to really get into quadruplicity. But what I wanted to end with is 1243, sorry, is this. We must imagine a complex turning interrelations movement event. And I mean that very seriously, a type of complex mirror play of moving relations and relations, that's what an interrelation is, constituting one complex event, not bounded by a circle or a line or a scheme. The eerie resemblance between the radically other to Heidegger's Fourfold and the thing. He gives us the cryptic, poetic, fuzzy, hallucinogenic Heidegger, which is Heidegger, as Ian said, it wouldn't make any sense to try to read this stuff if you didn't know that authentically the guy is engaging phenomenologically with this passage to the other beginning. We don't want to reduce all these moments to one moment or map spatially the complex movement of movements for one or more of these moments back to a unified whole. Remember, nothing by necessity comes to presence for Heidegger. Literally, the coming of nothing is neither presence nor absence. Otherwise, we're back to problems that descend from Platonic metaphysics, particularly its most complex and difficult texts, Parmenides, acknowledged both by Hegel's phenomenology and the Intro to Heidegger's Being and Time, most complex, the greatest aesthetic achievement of ancient dialectic. I love that from Hegel. Plato's Parmenides. You read that book. It's nothing since then. And for me, book 12 in the metaphysics, not 9. That's where he really gets into his own art of theology. The absolute is life. It's the duration and movement that is God. When he's getting at his attempt to rethink substance. Both Hegel and Heidegger recognize the incomparable genius of both works as we do. But frankly, if someone can name a philosopher more profound, impenetrable, deeper, extended, and massive in content, level of abstraction, contortions of mind, deepening of paradoxes than Plato and Aristotle, for me, Hegel and Heidegger, in the last 2,500 years of West philosophy, please tell me who that is. Leibniz, Spinoza, and Kant for Deleuze, maybe not for me. We have to take a different turn in preparation for the passage event to the other beginning, not the one that began in pre-Christian ancient Greece with Plato and Aristotle. We're also imagining the antithesis, not a second moment as the first formal negative, and the negative as a second negative, to go back to Hegel's logic, against the kairos. That's the fulfillment of time in history, the unicity that we find in the New Testament, and the outstanding problem of the parousia, which goes back to the early Heidegger. Nobody can talk about, theologians can talk about this, and they can think about it literally, but to think about it in the ontotheological destruction of the concept, to use my language, hence the absurd numerology that could result if we were still playing around with the Trinity, Christology, and of course, if you've ever read the book of Revelations, with Satan and the Antichrist. No, that's literal sort of appropriation of the biblical heritage. We're not talking about that. Like Hegel, we have to remain in use his language, realm of pure thought. We have to remain there. The event of the Alpha event where speculative philosophy ultimately surpasses while swallowing whole the religion, particularly Christianity. What is the ontological necessity of this? What is the destiny for this reckoning? Oh no, Nietzsche, he already did the work for us. No, he didn't. A cannibalistic act, if you will, one that may scare us all. That is to slay the hydra of philosophy and religion at the same time when it comes to the insistence and persistence of three in the Western tradition. Lastly, my two quotes. This I found from Judith Wolf's work on theology. She is a theologian, not speaking about her work per se or what it has to offer, but I'm uplifting one of the letters that she found to a friend in 1929. Contemporary Catholicism must remain to us a horror. This is 1929. And you all know 1927, phenomenon the lecture he gave, I forgot where, was it in Freiburg? Alfred, I think it's Freiburg, on phenomenology and theology. That faith, a specific possibility of existence, is in its innermost core the mortal enemy of the form of existence that is an essential part of philosophy, and that is factually ever-changing. That's a phenomenological reduction there, and then Ian's historicity. Faith is so absolutely the mortal enemy that philosophy does not even begin to want in any way to do battle. That's what we have to think with. What is he? Wow, now he's saying philosophy is weak. You better understand its enemy. You can laugh at theology. And theology is not fully, it doesn't have the philosophical genius of what the philosopher can accomplish. Bultmann is not Heidegger. Karl Barth is not Hegel. For me, these quotes say nothing about today's banal debates about religious faith versus atheism, nor is it a matter of debate internal to philosophy's religion as to what justifies or nullifies religion as an object or ontological entity, and whether religious serves a purpose or can meet any teleological goals. Heidegger is getting at something much deeper when it comes to the Agnes and the passing by of the last God, which in his later period, whether in the Black Notebooks, the Beitrag, or elsewhere, Heidegger attests until his own last gasp. My own, coming back to your being towards death. And this has nothing to do with the Christian philosophy. So I conclude there. I apologize for my scattershot presentation, but this is one section of 38 single-space pages. I have a lot more, and we'll be very happy to say more about it if you permit me the time. So thank you.
You're right. So, Keith, you want to?
Sure, yeah. Just you're confronting Heidegger in an analytic. Your dialectic. It seems you're trapped in a dialectic. What about the dialogical approach to Hegel rather than a dialectic and Heidegger himself?
That's a great question, Keith, because the speculative metaphysics, the ambition, which is a childhood ambition that's been around, is to say, well, every other thinker is incomplete. And Ian and I, we were both students of Derrida in the early 90s, and to see him try to battle with both Heidegger and Hegel, but to me, in a way, it's a much longer story.
I noticed your language, your Derridian language. You both speak it.
No, we're totally different. I don't.
But the way Derrida thought is reflected in both of you.
Well, it's just like you can't.
It's a compliment. I'm not trying to.
We can't kill the father. We try as much as possible.
Yeah. It's
we both. But actually, let's get into that because the young guys back then, we weren't along for like the praising and the adoration. We were young, and of course he was a superstar.
We were young Feuerbrands. Yes.
We're Nietzsche's because Nietzsche's don't make me the Superman. You better
transvalue of course. Yeah.
To Overbeck, hey, I don't even believe my own truths anymore. They're trying to make me this great guy.
Oh yeah.
Go create your own stuff, guys. And so
exactly.
But to get back to your analytic, this is all about the dialogue. It is the most authentic possibility that Heidegger has. You put it so beautifully yesterday. The incompletion of being in time allows the later Heidegger to understand the collapse, but then to pass through it, but not to recover it, but to then have a more genuine relationship to what he was getting at. And you see that in all the quotes. We did that last April in the 1936 lecture. You're trying to reading being in time. But
you're trying to dance in a corpus. You're trying to dance with a corpse, I think.
But let me try to get to the question though, which is, I feel that if you can suspend for a moment the epochality of the reception of Heidegger and read Heidegger in a genuine pre-late Heidegger, if that makes sense, but even being in time, he's not the destroyer destruction history of ontology. Here's a very humble dude who admits in the introduction, hey, the Greek language where you can have a Plato who's the genius of philosophy and a Thucydides who's just like a journalist and historian, although classicists will tell you that Thucydides' Greek is much more difficult than Hegel's. In Aristotle, the Greeks, well, they can really, I admire their power. I'm a weak guy, I don't know all that power.
Yeah.
But they have the resources of their language to be able to answer the question. Hey, look, I can't, but wait a minute. The question appeared to those simpletons, those primitives in a certain way. I'm a modern guy. I got the benefit of 2,500 years. I'm going to reconstruct this question. I'm going to make it so freaking difficult. I'm going to take the watch apart. And when I put it back together, it's going to be so difficult that nobody can answer it, including myself. But I'm also going to say, my powers are weaker. But, essentially the problem didn't appear to them. And because they didn't pass through Christianity, is what he didn't say it there. But that requires an authentic rereading of everybody Heidegger talks to. Just go read the endnotes, whether it's Kierkegaard or Nietzsche or Husserl or Jaspers or whoever you want to turn to. But I'm talking about Hegel. He ends Being in Time with a clash, an altercation with Hegel's phenomenology. You need to go get your PhDs in philosophy, or at least study a lot of philosophy if you don't care about PhD philosophy. Go read the phenomenology over and over and over again. There's a Vihung, there's a two-ness, not just nature and history, space and time, but there's the notions time, it's chirological. There's the cavalry and the Schiller's quote. This dude collapses too before we get to the cycle. And then it appears magically, the quadruplicity, everything I'm looking for, the Holy Grail. Okay. And then the fourfold in Heidegger. But I don't care about autos, and I really don't care about theos. Yeah. I care about the Western mind. Yeah. This is not to say anything. I don't want to subsume Eastern, Indigenous, and everybody else. I don't know them, but I'd like to learn from them. Yeah. But this Western pathological mind and its threeness has got to go. And buried in it were two guys that actually attempted that, Hegel and Heidegger.
Okay.
Okay. So we got Akim.
Thank you.
And, thank you. More to say.
To Ian, then to Michael, and then to Akim.
So thank you, Raj. I'll keep it short because you've got a big line of people who want to ask you questions. But that was wonderful. I'm trying to deduce your project from those little glimpses. So
as always.
And from having talked to you for how the hell long has it been? And so the true time is four-dimensional quote you dropped on us from Time and Being and your view that Heidegger thinks being toward death, but not being toward birth. I'm trying to understand how you're connecting those. Now, if I dumb it down in the following way, what do you think? So, and then the whole, what was it, Kairos parousia thing. So, when Heidegger says true time is four-dimensional, I hear that as saying true time is the fourfold. It's relating to being via the fourfold. The fourfold is a kreuzweise, like a crosswise,
exactly,
breaking through. So the cross is there, the four, right? But the cross has been, it's not a crucifix, it's not a T, X, and it's been knocked on its side as if it was rolling. But the Occam and I have worried about some of the connections in some of these other notebooks to other crosses, but to connect it to the futurity point. So you started with that quote from what is it, 325 in the German, where futurity looks like it's the self coming toward itself in death. So is that when you say Heidegger thinks being toward death, and that opens up on originary temporality, you're thinking of the moment where my finite self, that's complete because it's projectless, comes toward my worldly project self as its world explodes, collapses, and then that would be, am I understanding this right? That would be the kairos, the fulfillment of time. And then the parousia, or the second coming, would be being toward birth, where then I let another kind of self come toward myself by opening myself to the future self I would be, so that I'm reborn to the world. Is that something like what you're suggesting, or am I just
No, because you're right. It's just throwing in the cars and the parousia as the two ends, and then the conflation of the fourfold with the fourth moment. One thing you did say, and we're on the same page because we all read Heidegger, literally in the sense that let's just don't go too quickly to perishing and demise. If you can suspend the human subject and how we all feel about our own mortality for a second, living finitely, as you said, but authentically, shattering ourselves against it and coming back and having the anxiety and the freedom, sort of the dizzying sort of like sense of like, okay, I have the courage to actually pass through now because I'm not just trying to transpire in time, especially with the they conception. We're about scientists and then the afterlife and even the religious, but we have a whole nother relationship. Impending, a way to be, letting itself come towards itself, the greatest possibility to be, bracket Jesus' own being towards death before his own death and ascension, resurrection in a seal tomb, ascension. He's got his own being towards death. It's very powerful. He's got his own ecstatic temporalization. He's still alive. He's not talking to anybody. He's talking to his father. He's got the hour. There's a lot of complexity there with this kairos, even before he even actually dies. And then, of course, lays the platform for Paul and others to be Christian. It's not I who no longer lives. I'm already dead to this world, but Christ who lives in me. So I don't want to get into the theological. I'm a child. I'll say this with Einstein. It's just I'm literally saying that you're not going to find this in Heidegger. I don't want Derrida's fourth moment, dissemination, four sides, those of us that know the Derrida. It's not 1, 2, 3. Thesis, let's just use Marx, for example. Master-slave dialectic in antiquity. Thesis, antithesis has to collapse. New identity synthesis, lord, serf. Feudal age, Middle Ages, and that collapses, and you get the capitalist and the worker. That's your 3-moment dialectic. I don't read Hegel. I see the Heideggerianization. So I want that mirror play fourfold, but I want this event of movement, which is what we see in that passage. And if you want to reread absolute knowing, extract a quadruplicity from this as a unified absolute notion. But I'm not calling it movement. I'm going back, therefore, to Heidegger to say, we're going to talk about time, which is missing vision 3. So long story short, when you talk about the two ends, when you move to my model, you have not past, present, and future, which you can actually iterate 6 times in a set. It's not just you have these 3. You can mess around with those things 6 times. As I say here, past, present, future, past, present. Mathematically, that's all you can really do with it. I don't really want to do that. There's plenty of analytic treatments of how we can screw around with that. And what would be the pod beneath the 3 that holds up the 3 as a fourth dimension? Forget about physics. That's spatialized relativity, quantum gravity, quantum mechanics, black holes, time reversibility, time travel, dilation of time. Let them have fun. Let them talk about. We're philosophers. We're working on that. We're doing the ontological difference. Move it back to the antinomies. I was serious about that. You got an origin and end, no origin and no end. You know this from the end notes of being in time. Moving image of time. Time is a moving image of eternity, the Timaeus, or you go into Kierkegaard. What's even funny about endlessness or timelessness is that it's a temporalized finitude. It arises from the finitude of temporality to even have that conception. And it's not because you're a Descartes to have the infinite in you. Someone else has to put it in you. And that's why it exists. No, he's literally talking about the reduction, the Ursprünglichkeit, and the derivation of everything from this Abgrund, which is incomplete. It's the ecstatic temporality. So what I find great pleasure in the late Heidegger is not the poetics and the earth, sky, mortal divinity, or how we can reorient ourselves in this, not just as a post. There's no post. You've already destroyed that and given us another way to think about it. But how do we have this passing through event in the most authentic manner possible in terms of inexhaustibility and a phenomenological kind of encounter with what delivers or gives everything in general is the clearing or lighting that comes from, you can call it great works, but it comes for other people, it can come from other things too. You and I know this. For Native Americans, it can come from something else. It doesn't have to come from Van Gogh.
Well, it's a hermeneutics of facticity at that point.
Well, it's the facticity, but it's the temporalization of the finitude of temporality. But the Frankenstein monster I have in me, the monstrosity in the exarch above gravitology, it's a monster. It truly is origin end, no origin, no end. The other to all 4, the interrelationships between them. I don't want to get into it, but there is a way to connect the overlapping movement inside the ecstasies, equiprimordiality. But you can't use Euclidean geometry for it.
Mm-hmm.
I have my own. But I also have the resource of non-Euclidean geometry, which is what the physicists have. That's what Einstein had. He's got space-time. Who cares? Mm-hmm. We're literally talking about 4-dimensional time. I'm being literal here. But what it requires is a passage from everything, all those margins and gaps in division 2, all the sections, you need 65. You need 72. You need 83 with Hegel. Quite frankly, you need 81 through 83 and 6 on within timeless in its origin. I'm talking about four-dimensional time. But it's also for Hegel a movement-event set of relations that is the absolute that triumphs over the three-moment dialectic and quite frankly the Trinity. And if I really want to scare everyone, yes, I'm also being literal in an Eignan appropriation of the parousia, which is 2 Thessalonians 2, which is also the early Heidegger, and John's Revelations, which is a full ontology of the Antichrist. It's not the guy in the Gospels that lives, dies, sees his friends, and goes up in the sky. And we're all sitting here and waiting for the last God to save us. We're talking about the ontology of another being.
Okay.
Too fast.
Again, go to you. And then we'll go to Mario.
I think Michael was first.
Oh, Michael.
Go ahead.
He put his hand
It's
down.
okay, Akeem. You go ahead. Your question will be more interesting than mine was.
Well, I doubt that. I would be interested in your question, really, but I just so Ian has covered some of my questions, but I would like to know where do you see Heidegger speaking about being towards birth, and how may that be connected with the equiprimordiality? And you seem to have an issue with that, and I don't know what that issue could be. And then you said about Hegel's realm of pure thought, and I would say that yes, in Hegel, but Heidegger, I think, does not embrace pure thought.
Sure.
And I think his dialectic of Dasein is also about that. And the last thing I would like to ask, with your quote at the end when you finished, and I think it was from Phenomenology and Theology, and where Heidegger seems to say that faith and philosophy are diametrically opposed to each other. The question I would have here, and I would have to go back to that piece in order to understand how Heidegger understands faith and philosophy in that piece, but one really has to understand what is meant by faith and what is meant by philosophy. And since I think there are ways to actually see them moving in the same direction with the same motivational force. That's just, and that's where I would be headed to. So
That's wonderful, Akeem, as always. And to me, honestly, and you know this, we both talked. There's a hidden theological passion and love that is the substrate, I think, for Heidegger. For Hegel was in the seminary. Heidegger was the lost Jesuit, aborted Jesuit, and quite frankly, I was pursuing a doctorate of theology before I got my job here. I got past my comps, but I didn't finish my dissertation. But luckily, I have another PhD. But it's actually more scary than that. It's not the dichotomy of the two. It's the fact that you could have internal to the life. You want to talk about dialogue, Keith. I'm concerned about Heidegger's trips to the Buron, the lifelong, the ending, the burial. The crucifix is not the crucifix, as we know from his own burial. It's an eightfold structure at the site of Mesquite. You can't kill off it's what Derrida taught us, is like what sucks for the Western person. I'll just use these as an example. You're born in your Judeo-Christian substrate. You grew up that way. Evangelically or not, maybe you're born through atheism too, and suspension because of your parents. But that's how you came out. You become a philosopher at some young age, probably when you're 15, 16. There's a rupture. It's like cutting off an arm and there's nothing that can suture it. Then you're suspended. There's no way. You're too smart to go back to theology, dogmatic religion and theology. But then there's a trace of the rupture from that. And you try to bring that into philosophy and you're going to fall on your face. And then you find philosophy empty because the foolishness of God makes the wisdom of the world look stupid. But it's that tension that you all feel in your work, and Derrida expressed it as well. So we have to get to the tension. No way I'm going to reduce faith. And he says this here too in the quote. Form of existence, I want to get into hermeneutics of facticity with Keith, but I want to get into this altercation, this mortal enemy is to the depth. But Akeem is, look, the estrekung, it's not just letting itself come towards itself. I'm always my having beenness. And out of this historizing of the past, you might think, okay, it's not Nietzsche remembering his future, or I'm going to imagine when I die, my friends are going to play this music at my funeral, or my kid is going to be this way or that, or I'm going to see everything in a flash, or I get to repeat this eternally in one instant. I'm dilating my whole bucket of water that I'm born with limidity. It's all going to sort of refill, but then splash out everywhere. It's stretching itself, being stretched along. The
Mhm.
self-stretching is if you say birth and death, and those are the two polarities, and we're
Mhm.
somehow the in between, which is never present to us,
Mhm.
because we're carrying both these inside us,
Mhm.
but it's not 2 points in time, and therefore I have to cross them
Right.
out, put them under erasure.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
then there's
yeah,
a
I get that,
suspension and
yeah.
resurrection. That's already within human facticity. Everybody, we all have this
Mhm.
until one of us can figure out how to live forever. Jesus, he has a virginal birth that's mythic. He's got a real death. That's interesting. The first pole is mythic, but the first one's real, painful, terrible. Nobody's in the tomb with him. It's sealed. So don't Alfredstown and Anastasia, Greek, standing up. You weren't in the tomb, Ian. Was Paul? Was who's the first guy? Peter. He just said if there's an eternity, who would want to spend a whole eternity with Peter? And he seems to be he makes a lot of stupid mistakes during the course of Jesus' life. So, we're talking about an event that can't be seen in that structure. So that's the faith component. But the philosopher, four-dimensionality is to imagine the two poles split apart in their alterities, and to imagine the event of that movement. That's why 72 is so important. I don't want to get into historicality just yet in Destiny and Vogue. End of 72, or maybe it's 74. Hey guys, look, I'm really talking about the enigma of motion. He's getting back to metaphysics. Perhaps it's Plato and Aristotle, but he doesn't follow up on that. Our man Hegel, his whole thing begins and ends with this problem of metaphysics and the metaphysics of motion. There's not one fragment of Heraclitus that hasn't been lifted up in my system, to quote Hegel. So I'm switching out time in Heidegger for movement in Hegel, bringing that back to Heidegger's project and going forward. So quite frankly, back to whoever I think it was Keith, there's nothing in Hegel. And there's certainly not 200 years of Hegel scholarship that I trust, except Bill Desmond, who was exiled by the Anglo-Americans because he didn't abide by the three. He's the heretic. Derrida and the French guys, they're crazy according to the Anglo-American tradition. We can't trust them. But I'd rather read, some of that Hegelian scholarship, Hippolyte to Derrida for sure. Maybe Levinas. Ian, you can tell us more. But it's not just an arbitrary movement to four for the fuck of it. Sorry, was this recorded? I apologize if there are any kids on this. But for the hell of it, it is part of the destinal event that is passage and the coming of the last God for your own Judeo-Christian tradition that you can't escape from. And it's the closure of it, because you're not just smuggling in something else. This is happening right now and occurring in your own tradition, and you can't see it. Nietzsche couldn't articulate it. Heidegger could see it. He couldn't articulate it. So it has everything to do with this Judeo-Christian substrate and why the fourness is necessary for an entire structure of revelation that is unprecedented. It has to do with the movement and the connection to time. When you've given up on within timeness and the linear spatialization of time is now points, past, behind you, present, now, future ahead of you. Beneath that is a four-dimensionality that gives rise to it. That's my hypothesis. I'm sticking to it.
Okay, thank you, Roy. Some people asked in the chat if you would be willing to share the complete text.
I defer to my friend. Oh God, I love doing that, but you've got to publish it. Ian, look, you're the ethicist. Tell me what to do. I'd love to, but first of all, it's a Frankenstein monster. Can I give you some things that exist? Can I point you to papers that exist that point to the project that's been published, or
yes?
how do you want to handle that?
It's totally up to you. If you say no,
I have several. I have several papers that point to the big hypothesis. This one in particular, yeah, I'll give sections of it. I'll try to do that.
But you can put some papers of yours in the chat so people can copy it.
Yes, I can. And Alfred, do we have each other's emails or a way to contact each other? Or yeah, you do. I think you sent the email in terms of the Zoom links. So I will send out some links, and I appreciate you.
Well, you can always send it to me, and I'll send it out again.
Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Okay, we'll manage with the time. So